All right, well, as we get started tonight with our study on biblical cosmology, I just want to remind you we'll do the same thing we've done the last 2 weeks. It will be different than our usual Bible study. First of all, obviously, we're over here in the fellowship hall so that we can use the television for the PowerPoint presentation. But the other thing that's different is that during this study, I'm doing it a little bit differently in that I will ask you to hold any questions or comments or observations that you have until the very end tonight. And then at the end tonight, we'll have time for you to ask whatever questions you want to ask, and also for you to make any comments or observations that you'd like to. So if you have something to write on or write with and you think of a question, you might want to jot it down. I know when I was a school teacher, my students on a regular basis would say, "Mr. McBarry, you didn't call on me when my hand was up, and now I forgot my question." And so if you need to, make yourself a note what your question is, and we'll come back to those at the very end tonight. So a little bit different than what we normally do with our Bible study. We are studying the subject of biblical cosmology. Cosmology, of course, as we talked about the first week, is the study of the universe, the creation of the universe. The sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, how God made it all, how it all fits together, and how it all interacts together. And we've been through 2 weeks. Tonight will be week number 3 of what I believe is going to be an 8-week study on biblical cosmology. The topic for tonight, you see, is Masters of the Universe. That's a little bit tongue-in-cheek title. That title, Masters of the Universe, is the title that I chose because that is what the scientists purport to be. They claim to be the masters of the universe in that they have taken things that mankind knew and understood for almost 6,000 years, and in the last 500 years they have totally thrown out not only everything man knew from actual science, but also what man knew from the Bible. They've thrown it all out and created something totally different, a new cosmology, and most of it, well, actually all of it that's different than the Bible, can't be proven by science or any scientific means. It only exists as equations on paper, mathematical equations. You're going to see some of that tonight. So that's kind of what the topic for tonight will be about. Now, in the last 2 weeks leading up to tonight, we talked about how biblical cosmology is different than today as far as some content. We haven't gotten to the really big stuff yet. It's still yet to come, and that will begin next Sunday evening. But in the first 2 weeks already, we looked at some things that modern science says that are totally different than the Bible. We know that the evolutionists they're wrong on where life began and how life began, and evolution as you and I have heard it, where mankind and all other living things evolved from lower types of organisms. But beyond that, moving into the realm of actual cosmology, science is just as wrong on cosmology as it is on biology and evolution in that respect. And so I want to say as we begin tonight, and especially as we get into the next 2 weeks, I've said this, I know, a dozen times already, but I think it needs repeating again. The things that you're going to see out of the Bible are totally different than what science says the way things are. It's going to be totally different than what you were taught in science class from the time you were in first grade all the way through university, if you went to university. But the Bible is still the Word of God. I want to read one verse as we begin tonight. It's a verse that we looked at the first night that we began the study in biblical cosmology. I'll read it. It's Romans 3, verse 4. It says, "Yea, let God be true, but every man a liar." What that simply means is that anytime man says something that goes against what the Bible says, it's not God that's the liar, it's man. Oftentimes in history, geography, a lot of other things, man has said, oh, the biblical account is just wrong. only to later find out through archaeology and historical records that, in fact, what the Bible says was true all along. Man was just catching up to what the Bible had already said thousands of years earlier. It's the same way in the area of science. The Bible is not a science book, but everything it says about science is right. We make too many mistakes in every area of our lives as Christians by trying to make the book out to be something different than what it says. We either want it to fit with what scientists say or historians say or pop psychologists say, when we'd be a lot better off to just take the Bible literally for what it says. That's the way that we will enter our study tonight. Now, as we enter, I want to start by looking at some of these things regarding modern cosmology, what modern scientists say about cosmology that we've already talked about, because it sets the stage and lays the groundwork for the things we're going to see and hear tonight. I also need to say as we begin that I have the PowerPoint presentation and I have 3 very short videos that, Lord willing, we'll have time to watch interspersed in the study tonight as we go through. But for whatever reason, none of the PowerPoint programs that I was able to download will allow me to play the videos on the TV screen and you be able to see the video and hear the audio at the same time. Don't know the reason for that. So when we come to one of those videos, I'm going to have to pause for just a second, pull the video up on YouTube because I uploaded them, and we'll watch the video, then we'll go back to the PowerPoint presentation. I did not put together any of the videos that you're going to see tonight. They were done by other people. I don't think there's anything, any language in it that would be inappropriate. If there is, forgive me. I tried to scan all of it and make sure there wasn't. But the content of the videos, I think it'll be a help to you because you'll be able to visualize some of the things we'll be talking about as we go through. So the first thing modern cosmology says is that everything started with a big bang. And unless you want to say God said, let there be, there wasn't a big bang. That's the closest thing to a big bang that there was. So we know that modern cosmology totally starts at the wrong place. There was no big bang where everything fit on something smaller than the head of a pin and exploded into everything there is in the universe. That's not the way it started. But if you believe that, if you start with the wrong premise, you're going to end up with some wrong conclusions down the road. We also talked about the fact that modern scientists and cosmology says that the sun was created by the Big Bang along with all the other suns that are out there in the universe. And the Earth and the other planets in our solar system were spun off the sun in some way at some point and cooled down over millions, or as Carl Sagan would say, thank you, billions and billions of years. And eventually the earth came into existence after the sun. And yet you and I know from a simple reading of Genesis chapter 1, that's not what happened at all. It was on day 1 that God created the heaven and the earth. On what day was it that God created the sun, the moon, the stars? Day 4. So it was not in the order that evolutionists say. And it did not take millions or billions of years to effect. And then the next thing up here is they say that the moon is simply a reflector of the sun. That the sun has light that it puts out, and the sun is simply a reflector of it. But we looked at a dozen verses or so 2 weeks ago that very clearly state in the Bible that the sun is a light and the moon is a light. They're both lights. Now, tonight we're not going to discuss what the moon is or is not, but I will just simply say one of the things that it is a light. What it is not, we won't talk about tonight. We'll save that for another time. But the moon absolutely is a luminary body, just like the sun is. It is a light. We talked about how the light of the moon is totally the opposite of the light from the sun. If it was reflecting sunlight, then the properties of the light would be the same as the properties of sunlight, just dimmer. But that's not the case at all. The properties of light coming from the moon are the exact opposite of the properties of sunlight in a number of respects, and we talked about that already. I won't reteach it. Then the fourth thing up here, the modern cosmologists, astrophysicists say Earth is a spinning ball. It's spinning 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. That's what they say. Those are their numbers. We talked about how it is goes so much totally against actual science and what would be observable if the Earth was spinning 1,000 miles per hour. But the real evidence is what the Bible says. The Bible says very clearly that the Earth is still, that it moves not. That goes hand in hand with the last point up here, and that is they say the Earth is revolving around the sun. There was no human civilization for the first 5,500 years of human history that believed that. It was only within the last 400 to 500 years with Copernicus that began to be taught, that the Earth is going around the sun. Every human culture, civilization before that, including the Bible, the biblical model, said that it was the opposite. That the sun and the moon revolved above or around the earth, along with all the rest of everything in the heavens. Now, you say, preacher, that's just kind of hard to believe. How in the world could we have been taught those things our whole lives? And now you're saying that the earth doesn't move? That the earth is in the center? Geocentrism, not heliocentrism? That goes against all of modern science. Yes, it absolutely goes against all of modern science. Well, preacher, why would they have changed that teaching 500 years ago? Well, we started talking last week about who the men were that changed those ideas. They had no scientific proof of these things, but they needed it to be so for a particular reason. You see, if you believe the earth is the center of the universe, and everything else is revolving around the earth, and the earth is in the middle, that means the earth is something special. And everyone who's on the earth is special. That is, it's because we're the center of God's creation, just like this book says it is. But if you don't believe this book, and you don't want to believe in the God who created everything that there is, the best thing you could do would be to get people to not believe this book. So science has set out for the last 400 to 500 years to discredit the Bible and get people to believe something else, even though there's no science, real science, to support any of their foundations. We'll see that some more as we continue tonight. It began with Copernicus. He's the one who changed 5,500 years of human history and said, nope, we're all going around the sun. It's the center. The earth isn't the center, and the earth is just going around one sun that's a sun among millions or billions of suns that are out there. The earth is nothing special, and we're nothing special. We're all just a bunch of happenstances, accidents, if you would. And of course, that's what evolution wants us to believe anyway. But you and I know that's not true. Man is special. He's created in the image of God, and he's at the center of God's creation. Then there was Kepler. He's the one that came up with the idea that the Earth and the other planets revolve in elliptical orbits around the sun. We talked about the fact that the math that he used to prove that was actually stolen from a man that he very possibly was involved with his mysterious death a year after he started working with him, because Tycho Brahe would not give him his findings, all of his years and years of calculations of charting the stars and the planets. And so Tycho Brahe mysteriously died. He took over all the data, and this man said, no, Tycho Brahe was all wrong in all of his conclusions. I've taken his data and I've determined that the sun is in the middle, just like Copernicus said. Then there was Galileo, who came along. You know him for supposedly inventing the first modern telescope. And he said, oh yeah, my telescope verifies Copernicus and Kepler's findings. Then there was the problem that if Earth is a spinning ball, you got to have some magical force to hold everything onto that spinning ball to keep it from flying off. And at the same time, you've got to have some magical force to keep the Earth and all the planets staying in a circle or an ellipse going around the sun and not flying off into hither, thither, and yon into outer space. So along came Sir Isaac Newton, we looked at as we ended last week, who was not only a master mason and up to his eyeballs in Freemasonry, the occult, alchemy, astrology. He totally denied the deity of Christ, the Trinity, and the inspiration of Scripture. He was not a Christian man in spite of the fact I've heard numerous Christian scientists and even creationists try to say that Sir Isaac Newton was a Christian. He was not a Christian. His own words say he was not a Christian. He was an occultist. He and all these other men were influenced not only by Freemasonry and the occult, but by the Jesuits. Every one of them. We don't have time to go back through all of that. I'm spending probably more time tonight than I should be on our review, but that brings you up to speed on a lot of what we've talked about, but not by any means all of it. So let's dig into tonight. The masters of the universe. Who are these men and others we're going to see tonight who have taken everything that our senses tell us are true and what the Bible tells us is true, thrown it all out the window in the last 400 to 500 years because they have a different agenda? The gravitron. Remember that crazy ride at carnivals that spun so fast it pushed you up against the wall? By the way, it didn't go nearly 1,000 miles per hour, maybe 60 miles an hour or so as it spun. But that's a result of centrifugal force from a spinning object. Things are pushed outward from the center. They're not pulled inward. And yet we're told that this mysterious force of gravity that Sir Isaac Newton just came up with out of nowhere, this force of gravity is what keeps everything stuck to a spinning ball, spinning 1,000 miles per hour, and it's what keeps the planets, including the Earth, within the orbit of the sun without flying off into somewhere else. Why did they come up with gravity? Sir Isaac Newton came up with the theory of gravity because none of their ideas about the sun being in the center or the earth spinning, none of that is even possible unless you have some magical force holding it all together. The only problem is that when you perform scientific tests, none of their theories match up with any observable evidence. In fact, the observable evidence says the opposite. We talked last week about the absurdity that they even say that not only does gravity hold water to a spinning ball, you know what happens if you put water on a spinning anything and spin it, the water goes flying off, not sticks to it. But they say not only does gravity hold water to the ball Earth, but that it also holds the air connected to the Earth as it spins 1,000 miles per hour. That's why you don't feel the effects of 1,000 mile per hour winds when you walk out the door here. But how absurd is it to believe that air is being held to the Earth by gravity? Won't go back through all that from last week. You can go back and listen to that if I ever get this up online. But you see what happens when something spins. It pushes everything outward. There is no observable thing where it's pulling everything, holding it together. Instead, it's doing the opposite. The theory of gravity was created out of thin air by Isaac Newton and then revised by Albert Einstein, who was an unsaved, atheistic, socialist, Marxist Jew who did not believe in the God of the Bible and did not believe in any God at all, to be quite frankly, to explain the things about heliocentricity that had to exist in order to make the concept work. Even today, however, there is no proof that any such thing as gravity exists. The effects of gravity by one body upon another cannot be replicated in experiments, and a growing body of scientists now argue that gravity does not exist at all. When I was pulling up the YouTube videos that I loaded online earlier for tonight, one of the videos that popped up on YouTube that I wasn't looking for was a YouTube video about what scientists today call the string theory. It's something that modern scientists know that gravity, there's no scientific proof that it even exists, so they've come up with a lot of other replacement theories for gravity, one of which is called the string theory. There are some others too, but you can look that up for yourself. All of the effects of the downward pull to the earth, observable to mankind, are easily explained through the law of mass and density. You don't need gravity to explain why you don't float off into the air, and when you drop this ink pen, it falls to the floor. You don't need gravity to explain that. It's explained by the law of mass and density, which are just laws of physics. The more dense an object is relative to its mass, it either rises or falls depending on the medium around it. That medium could be the air, could be water, could be some other liquid. Depending on what it is that you drop something in, it's either going to rise or it's going to fall, depending on whether its mass and its density is lighter or heavier than what it is, whether it's the air or the water or something else. There's no need for any imaginary force called gravity except to make the spinning ball whirling around the sun theory work on paper. No one ever believed in any such thing until the masters of the universe came up with their theory of heliocentricity. What's the law of density? Here it is. First of all, look at the picture over here. They have different items of different mass and density that they've dropped into this cylinder of different types of liquids. You see, first of all, that the liquids have kind of settled out into layers based upon the density of the liquids. And then as they drop these solid objects into the liquids, the solid objects find their own level as well based on mass and density. In any medium such as air or water, things rise or fall totally depending upon their density and mass. If they are more dense for their mass in comparison to what's around them, they fall. If they are less dense for their mass in comparison to what's around them, they rise. That's it. There's no need for any special force called gravity, which scientists cannot define, nor prove, nor reproduce. The theory of gravity was solely created to support heliocentricity and the spinning ball view of the world that no one believed until 500 years ago. By the way, as it says up here, you can't reproduce any of these things related to gravity. This is the same as it is with all of the things related to modern cosmology. None of the science supports any of what they say. But preacher, that's just far-fetched and crazy if you're telling us that the earth is not spinning and the earth is not revolving around the sun. That's just crazy that you would say that as a preacher. But you know what? That's what the Bible says. We looked at it last week. There are more than 50 verses in the Bible that talk about the sun, the moon, and the stars moving around the earth. You know how many verses there are that talk about the earth moving? 0. And we saw about a dozen verses that say that the earth moves not, that it cannot be moved, that it is still, that it is fixed. All those are words that the King James Bible uses in those different verses. So, yes, I know this goes against everything you've been taught, everything I was taught. I have no doubt that right now, if this is your first time being exposed to this concept, you're having cognitive dissonance. You're hearing things that, well, they seem to be true, and the Bible says they're true, but it totally goes against everything you've been taught your whole life. You know what? There are a whole lot of other things that the world says are true too, that are not true. Let God be true, but every man a liar. What do your eyes tell you? Polaris, I actually mentioned this in our sermon this morning. Polaris is the name given to the North Star situated directly above the North Pole. It has been visible since recorded history began, and every civilization on earth has used it for navigation on both land and sea ever since. The entire night sky revolves around Polaris, the North Star, in the center there. All of the stars in the heavens circle around it every night. But it never moves. It has never moved. It has been in the same point the entire 6,000 years of man's history on the earth. How could that be possible if the earth was traveling, as we read their numbers, not our made-up numbers, but their made-up numbers last week? They say that the earth is moving around the sun 66,600 miles per hour, and that the sun is traveling through the Milky Way galaxy another 483,000 miles per hour, hurtling through space, dragging the earth and all the planets with it, according to modern science. How for 6,000 years could we be moving at these breakneck speeds throughout outer space and Polaris still be exactly where it is, above the North Pole, never in a different place for 6,000 years? And every other heavenly body revolves around it every single 24 hours. After doing all of this zipping along for more than 6,000 years, how would Polaris still be in the exact same place in our night sky? And why would all of the stars revolve around it every night, just like they have for 6,000 years? Unless the earth really isn't moving at all. And everything in the heavens is revolving around the earth instead, just like the Bible said. Now I'm going to go ahead and tell you, the modern cosmologists say, well, the reason it looks like the stars are all in the exact same place is because they're so far away, millions of light years away, that because they're so far away, you wouldn't be able to measure the amount they move. Your eye, and even with a telescope, we wouldn't be able to gauge that there was any movement at all. They're so far away. Why did they come up with the theory that the stars and the so-called suns that are out there and the so-called galaxies that are out there are millions or billions of light years away, which a light year is 93 million miles? Why did they come up with the idea that those were so far removed from the earth? It's because they had to come up with an answer to this question. Why is it that everything is in the same place it's been for 6,000 years? So, can they prove that the stars and the galaxies and the other suns that are out there are millions and billions of light years away? No, they can't prove any of that. It's just another one of their theories that they've had to come up with to prop up this theory, which had to have something to prop it up. All of their modern cosmology is a house of cards. One theory built upon another theory, none of it which lines up with observable scientific evidence or the Bible. It's been in the same place for 6,000 years. The North Star is stationary and never moves. All right, here's our first video. It's entitled, or I've entitled it, What They Don't Want You to Consider. So you're going to have to give me a minute, and let me see if I can pull up the YouTube video that we want to look at.
In the heliocentric model of the cosmos, the moon revolves around the Earth 13 times per year, traveling at 2,288 miles per hour, while the Earth revolves around the Sun once per year, traveling at 67,000 miles per hour. The following model and animation illustrate how this is supposed to occur. As you can see, since the moon is revolving around the Earth, which itself is revolving around the sun, in order to maintain its regular orbit, the moon would have to be constantly and drastically changing its speed in ways completely unaccounted for by the model. In the outer part of its orbit, the moon would have to speed up 67,000 miles per hour, in addition to its regular speed of 2,288 miles per hour, just to keep up with the Earth. So the moon would then be traveling at 69,288 miles per hour when it reached the front of the Earth. At this point, since the moon is allegedly 240,000 miles away from the Earth would catch up in just 4 hours, so the moon must continue traveling 67,000 miles per hour along Earth's trajectory, while simultaneously continuing its now perpendicular 2,288 mile per hour second trajectory. Then, as it turns to reach the inner part of its orbit, the moon must now slow back down to its original speed, allowing the Earth to pass by. Lastly, as it passes behind the Earth, the moon must once again quickly accelerate back up to nearly 70,000 miles per hour before getting left in the dust. In addition to all of this, the Sun itself is allegedly orbiting the Milky Way galaxy at 448,000 miles per hour, further compounding the problems and calculations of the heliocentric model. If this were true, then the Earth, Moon, and other planets would all have yet another set of ridiculous and impossible corkscrewing accelerations and decelerations necessary just to keep up with the Sun. And for the cherry on top, all of these calculations have been assuming perfectly circular orbits, but the actual heliocentric model claims that the Moon's orbit around the Earth's orbit around the Sun, and the Sun's orbit around the Milky Way are all elliptical, not circular, meaning there would be even more additional accelerations and decelerations to calculate depending where each one is along its elliptical path. These constant and drastic accelerations and decelerations necessitated by the heliocentric model are rarely, if ever, mentioned by globe believers, because they have always been taught that the reason we do not feel or experience any of this supposed motion is because we always travel at a constant velocity. In their own model, however, due to their elliptical orbits and revolving around other revolving bodies, the Moon, Sun, Earth, and other planets could not maintain constant velocities, and would instead be regularly accelerating and decelerating. Yet, meanwhile, you can stack a house of cards, make a rock cairn, or play a game of Jenga, all without any of this motion, acceleration, and deceleration ever being felt or experienced.
So the gist of this is that the moon revolving around the Earth, as the Earth revolves around the sun, means that as the Earth is going around the sun at a supposedly constant velocity, the moon could not revolve around the Earth at a constant velocity because it would fall way behind or we'd run into it. As it's going around the Earth, it has to be speeding up, slowing down, speeding up, slowing down. And yet that's not what they say happens. They say that all the bodies, including the moon and the Earth and the other planets and the sun, are all going at velocities that are constant velocities, the same speed all the time. In reality, not only is the speeding up, slowing down a problem for their model, but as the moon gets between the Earth and the sun, that smaller body, the moon, if gravity is what they say gravity is, it would cause the moon to be pulled further away from the Earth when it's between the Earth and the sun. There are so many problems with their model, and yet they want to say, well, the biblical model doesn't explain everything. Well, the biblical model tells us how it is. It doesn't seek to explain things. You can accept it or not accept it. And by the way, I'll say, as your pastor, you don't have to agree or accept everything that I'm saying, but if you don't choose to accept it, you'll have to do like I'm ashamed to say I did with my own Bible for years and years, and I believed what the scientists said and assumed that the Bible must be looking at it from some other vantage point. and not taking the Bible literally for what it says. But if you take the biblical model literally, it answers all the questions. We haven't gotten to the end of the study yet. It's going to answer a lot more questions, and probably some that you have already that you've come up with. We're going there, so give me time to get there. But their model answers none of the questions. It creates more questions than it answers. Now, I've got to try to get back on my handy-dandy electronic device here to the right place so we can get back to our PowerPoint presentation. Heliocentrists calculate that the Earth is moving through space at the speed of 66,600 miles per hour. By the way, those are the numbers they came up with. Keep in mind that the modern cosmologists, going from today all the way back to Copernicus, they are Freemasons, occultists, alchemists, and Jesuits, none of whom believe in the God of the Bible nor worship the God of the Bible. They worship someone different, but not God. And they believe the sun is hurtling through space at more than 450,000 miles per hour. At these speeds, it should be possible to prove the Earth is moving, right? A series of scientific experiments in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, intending to prove the movement of the Earth around the sun, had monumental unintended consequences. These scientists and their experiments we're about to discuss were all intentionally set up to prove that the Earth is moving. That the Earth is not still, it's not stationary, the Earth is moving around the sun. That's why they did the experiments, but it backfired. In 1871, George Airy, who I believe was the top astronomer for Great Britain, he attempted to prove the movement of the Earth, and his experiment ended up being known by his contemporaries as Airy's failure. Why? Because his experiment to prove that the Earth was moving showed the opposite, that it wasn't moving. Well, that created a problem, so some of his contemporaries said, hey, we better figure out what's going on here and do some more experiments so we can prove the Earth is actually moving. Because after all, we know the Earth is moving, right? That's what Copernicus said. That's what the scientists have been saying now for the last 500 years. So we know that the Earth is moving, so we better find an experiment that'll prove that. So in 1881, Albert Michelson produced an experiment that also failed to show any movement of the Earth. He came back 6 years later in 1887 with another scientist, and they did the Michelson-Morley experiment, which again failed to show any movement of the Earth despite rigorous efforts and very precise instruments. They did the experiment over and over and over again, and they got the same result every time. There's no movement of the Earth that can be detected. The equipment they used was so precise that the supposed speed that the Earth is going around the sun, this could have detected it down to 1/10 of that amount. But it still showed no movement of the Earth. In 1903, another experiment was attempted. It was a failure too. 1904, another 2 experiments failed. In 1913, George Sagnac again attempted the same experiment without success to demonstrate the movement of the Earth through space. He was one of the biggest name astronomers and physicists of his day. When his experiment failed in the early 20th century, the heliocentrists threw up their hands and said, uh-oh, what do we do now? We've got a problem. All of our experiments that we said before we did them was going to show the movement of the Earth has shown the exact opposite. What are we going to do now? How do we explain these experiments showing no movement of the Earth?
That's 6 times they tried it and failed.
That's correct. And those are the big name experiments that were lesser known scientists that did the same thing. Enter Albert Einstein. Though touted by the mainstream media for 2 generations As the greatest intellectual ever born among men, Albert Einstein's disdain for the Bible and the God of the Bible was such that he knew no bounds in what he was willing to do in order to downplay anything that seemed to support the Bible. Did he have an ulterior motive? Oh yes, he had an ulterior motive, just like the others did. Science had to be exalted above the Bible at all cost to him. Albert Einstein was a Zionist Jew, an atheist, an internationalist, a Marxist, a member and supporter of the NAACP, and a humanist. He served on the advisory board of the First Humanist Society of New York and said the following about God and the Bible. The word God is for me nothing more than the expression and product of human weaknesses. The Bible, a collection of honorable but still primitive legends which are nevertheless pretty childish. I can tell you where Albert Einstein is today. He's not in heaven, by the way. He had an ulterior motive for disproving the Bible, for trying to get men, women, boys, and girls to believe anything other than the Bible, to doubt your Bible. He wanted you to question your Bible. That's the goal of science, is to get you to question the Word of God. Einstein was forced, after all those experiments, to admit that either of two things could explain what we see around us. Either the earth is spinning on its axis and going around the sun, or everything we observe moving around us in the heavens could be explained simply by the earth being fixed and motionless in the center and the heavens revolving around the earth. Either of these two scenarios explain what we can observe around us, except the experiments all indicated that the first one wasn't what was happening, that it was what the Bible said, that the earth isn't moving. But neither the atheist Einstein nor the other high priests of modern science could accept that as true, or they would be forced to admit that the Bible was true about the earth, the sun, the moon, and what would that mean about the rest of the Bible being true? It was not an answer that Einstein or they were willing to allow. Listen to the words of some of these well-named astrophysicists and astronomers. Kepler himself said, I demonstrate by means of philosophy that the earth is round and is inhabited on all sides, that it is insignificantly small and is born through the stars. Did he say, I demonstrate by science that these things are true? No. He was at least intellectually honest enough when he was writing to his peers, other scientists, to admit he was demonstrating it by philosophy. It has to be this way. We know it has to be this way because, after all, it couldn't be that way, the Bible way. James Coleman, another physicist, said, in the effort to explain the Michelson-Morley experiment, the thought was advanced that the earth might be stationary. That's what it seemed to prove. Such an idea was not considered seriously, since it would mean in effect that our earth occupied the omnipotent position in the universe, with all the other heavenly bodies paying homage by revolving around the earth. He said, that's what the experiment showed, but we know that couldn't be right, because after all, it just couldn't be right, even though that's what the experiments demonstrated. Here's what Albert Einstein said. The struggle so violent in the early days of science between the views of Ptolemy and Copernicus, that's geocentrism and heliocentrism, would then be quite meaningless. Either coordinate system, either one, could be used with equal justification. The two sentences, the sun is at rest and the earth moves, or the sun moves and the earth is at rest, would simply mean two different conventions concerning two different coordinate systems. What Albert Einstein is admitting to his peers, scientists, is that it actually could be either way. The data says it could be either way. But we know it couldn't be that the earth is not moving because the earth is moving, right? Even though the science experiments don't prove that, it has to be that. He said again in 1922, I've come to believe that the motion of the earth cannot be detected by any optical experiment, though the earth is revolving around the sun. Now, how could he say we can't prove it, it can't be detected, but we know it's happening? How does he know it's happening if the experiments don't prove that it's happening? They don't say that it's happening, they say the opposite. I can tell you how he says, but we know that it's really doing it. It's because that's what he wants it to be. That's what he wants to believe it to be. That's what he wants you to believe, and he wants your faith to be in something other than this book. Not so special relativity. You see his famous equation, E equals mc squared. When the numerous attempts by physicists to prove the movement of the earth failed miserably every single time, Albert Einstein stepped to the plate for all atheists everywhere. I bet you were never told that he created his special theory of relativity, for which he's so famous, just for the purpose of trying to explain away the results of the Michelson-Morley experiment. Now, before I read any further, I bet you didn't know that his famous theory of relativity was created solely for the purpose of trying to explain away all those experiments that said the earth isn't moving. Bet you didn't know that.
Never heard it in college.
And the reason is because they don't want you to know those experiments ever took place and that they proved or demonstrated that the earth isn't moving. They don't want you to know that, so they're never going to tell you. That's why he postulated this theory of relativity, which, by the way, is just another theory to prop up the other theory, to prop up that theory, because they're all based on false premises to begin with. Refusing to accept the results of the experiment, which proved that the earth was not moving, he created a theory out of thin air which violates the very laws of physics known to all physicists even today. He literally said that in the experiment, a piece of stationary metal tubing somehow morphed its size and shrank to yield false results because of the effect of the speed of light. Never mind the fact that light is everywhere around us and does not violate the known laws of physics the rest of the time, only in that experiment. Nevertheless, his theory, which made absolutely no sense and could never and has never been proven in a laboratory test, got the evolutionists off the hook. After all, the average person, that's me and you, would never be able to understand his gobbledygook theoretical mathematical formula on paper. And so was born the theory of relativity in 1905, created specifically to explain away the many experiments that had proven that the earth was motionless. After all, that was an unthinkable possibility since it lined up with the Bible and not evolution. Now, I think the next one here is another video. It's only about 2 to 3 minutes, so entertain me here for humor me here for just a moment while I try to pull this one up.
In 1887, Michelson and Morley conducted an experiment that demonstrated that the Earth was stationary. Here's a short clip by Michael Bowden.
In 1887, an experiment shattered the scientific community. Michelson and Morley tried to check the speed of the Earth through the ether as it orbited the Sun by passing light in 2 directions, one in the direction of the Earth's travel and one at right angles, and then comparing them for differences. They expected to measure a speed of about 30 kilometers per second. To their amazement, there was no movement of this order. They called it a null result. They actually measured 1 to 10 kilometers per second, but it was still called a null result. They rushed out the theory called the Fitzgerald-Lorentz contraction. This claimed that the tube in line with the direction of movement shortens as it moves through the ether. There was no evidence whatsoever for this. It was only a way of getting over the implication that the Earth was stationary.
How convenient.
As stated in the video, in response to the Michelson and Morley's null result, meaning the experiment indicated that the Earth didn't move, the Lorentz factor and Einstein's special theory of relativity were created. Maybe a few of you researchers remember this quote from Einstein. While I was thinking of this problem in my student years, I came to know the strange result of Michelson's experiment. Soon, I came to the conclusion that our idea about the motion of the Earth with respect to the ether is incorrect, if we admit Michelson's null result as a fact. This was the first path which led me to the special theory of relativity. Since then, I have come to believe that the motion of the Earth cannot be detected by any optical experiment, though the Earth is revolving around the Sun. And that's Albert Einstein.
So Albert Einstein basically tried to prop up and come to the rescue the fact that this result showed no movement of the Earth by saying that the tube that the light was passing through, somehow mysteriously during the experiment, the tube shortened its length, even though that cannot be repeated anywhere else in the physical world, is not experienced anywhere else in the physical world. Somehow that tube shortened during the experiment, and that gave it the result that the Earth isn't moving when they were measuring the speed of light in that experiment. So where do we go from here? Well, have you ever experienced anything that would lead you to believe that the Earth is spinning 1,000 miles per hour? I haven't.
When I'm trying to put that ball on that ball.
Have you ever experienced anything that would lead you to believe that the Earth is hurtling 66,600 miles per hour through space around the sun?
Only when we go outside on the turn.
Then why have you believed those things were true? I want you to think about it for a minute now. Don't answer out loud, just a rhetorical question, but why have you and I believed those things were true? There's no evidence of that. There's no scientific proof of that, but even our senses don't give us any proof of that. You and I believe what we've been told. The only reason you believe the Earth is a spinning ball, the only reason you believe that the Earth is going around the sun is because you were told that. But it's the exact opposite of what this book says. Everything we experience and the experiments data line up with this book. Someone asked just a couple of weeks ago, well, what about all the scientific proof? Well, as you're seeing, and we've only touched the hem of the garment really so far, all of the true science evidence demonstrates that this book is true and goes against the modern cosmologist. But they want us to believe this book is what's wrong. What evidence has modern science given to prove these things are true? Or have we just been told that it's so? What do your God-given natural senses tell you? More importantly, what does the Bible say? Again, I have to go back to that premise from which we started this study. Even if you and I come up to something that we don't understand, we ought to believe it by faith if it's in this book. Even if it seems to be totally contradicted by science. If this book says it, we ought to believe it. But the reality is all of true science actually supports this book. It's not the other way around. What are the implications of all these lies by modern science? Why have they lied? And what else have they lied to us about? Well, next week, Lord willing, how many of you are going to be here next Sunday night? I know it's the day after Christmas. How many of you are going to be here next Sunday night? Let me see your hands. Okay, most of us, it looks like. You going to be able to be here?
I don't know.
Okay, all right.
Keith and Julie are supposed to be at that.
Okay. Well, Lord willing, next Sunday night is when we'll have the next installment. You've already seen in the things we've just covered that everything up to this point, it's all fabrications. They're all theories to prop up other theories. There's no science, true science, behind any of what they've postulated. Next week, come be here. I hope you'll be here. But you better hold on to your seat, because you're going to see some more things from this book that are more shocking than the things we've talked about so far about biblical cosmology. But not only are they borne out to be true in this book, they're borne out to be true by actual science, just like the other things we've seen the last 3 weeks. Please, if you're able to, be here. Now, it's actually past time to go. It's 11 after. But I have one last video that's 11 minutes. Do you all want to stay and watch it, or do you want to just go? All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start it, and when it gets to the end, I'll take questions, comments, and observations about anything we've talked about tonight. Only things we've talked about tonight. But if you need to go during the clip, I understand that too. All right? So,
How Einstein Made the Earth Move. I'm going to be reading a 21-page PDF, which you can find a link to in the description. This is written in 2016 by Dr. Robert Sungenis, a known geocentrist. Many might know him as the executive producer of the movie The Principle, which, if you have yet to see that film, I highly recommend it. But Robert faces tons of criticism, well, as does anyone who questions the current model, but Robert also gets extra criticism, and in my mind, unfairly. As an example, let's take a look at the Wikipedia page for Robert Sungenis and notice a few statements to start. First, the opening sentence states, Robert Sungenis says when he was born is an American traditional Catholic, known for his Catholic apologetics and his advocacy of a pseudoscientific belief that the Earth is in the center of the universe. So, to begin, we've got a pretty much one-sided statement there claiming that his belief that the Earth is the center of the universe is a pseudoscientific belief. So the question becomes, is this belief really pseudoscience? Is it really pseudoscientific? Well, let's start by taking a look at what the definition of pseudoscience actually is. Alright, with a quick search, we can see that pseudoscience is defined as a collection of beliefs or practices mistakenly regarded as being based on the scientific method. Alright, and over to the right here, we see pseudoscience consists of statements, beliefs, or practices that are claimed to be both scientific and factual, but are incompatible with the scientific method. So, my hope is by the end of this article, by the end of this PDF, that you can decide for yourself which belief is truly pseudoscience, which belief truly is incompatible with the scientific method. Is it the belief that the Earth moves, or that it does not? And so we just saw how biased this Wikipedia article can be, and so before I begin reading this PDF, let me start by saying that like all my videos, this video is for people like me searching for the truth. I always say, don't believe me, don't trust me, to do your own research, and I'll never stop saying that. But if you're a person who believes that what is in the mainstream and what we were all taught in school are the only facts, then you will hate this video and the PDF. You won't even listen, and we both know that that's true. So I invite you to move along, because the following information will surely be something that is not taught in schools, and you will quickly see the reason. Nope, this video is for those seeking the truth. You will hear me say quotes by Einstein and other physicists who will tell you how they know that the Earth moves, or better said, how they don't know. Throughout this article, you're going to hear a term used quite a few times. That term is petitio principii. Okay, let's look up the definition of that. So, it is described by Merriam-Webster as a logical fallacy in which a premise is assumed to be true without warrant, or in which what is to be proved is implicitly taken for granted, otherwise known as begging the question. Also, to get more details and many other important facts, you can obtain the DVD Journey to the Center of the Universe or the books Galileo Was Wrong and Geocentrism 101 at www.jttcotu.com. And so, without further ado, Albert Einstein, the Earth Mover, how Einstein made the Earth move when all the experiments showed it didn't move. In his 1881 and 1887 experiments, Albert Michelson discovered the Earth was not moving around the Sun. As Michelson himself described the results of his own experiment, this conclusion directly contradicts the explanation, which presupposes that the Earth moves. But since his colleagues, including Albert Einstein, were die-hard Copernicans who didn't want to believe that Michelson had discovered a motionless Earth, they proposed his experimental apparatus was distorted by the Earth's motion through space, and thus Michelson's apparatus only made it appear as if it wasn't moving. In scientific parlance, we call this the fallacy of petitio principii. That is, using as proof a moving Earth, the very thing one is trying to prove, a moving Earth. Let me explain. Michelson found that the Earth wasn't moving by using the speed of two light beams against one another.
The first light beam was pointed westward because it was the presumed direction of the Earth's movement around the Sun. The second light beam was pointed northward and thus away from the direction of the presumed moving Earth. The first light beam should have been affected by the Earth's movement through space if it is the Earth that is moving around the Sun at the accepted speed of 66,000 miles per hour. If so, the first beam would have traveled slower than the second beam, but that didn't happen. Both light beams traveled at nearly the same speed. According to Michelson, the first beam traveled only about 1/6 of the retarded speed needed if the Earth was moving around the Sun. The conclusion, as Michelson notes above, should have been that the Earth isn't moving around the Sun. Other physicists have noted the same truth. There was just one alternative. The Earth's true velocity through space might happen to have been nil. Physicist Arthur Eddington. The data of Michelson-Morley was almost unbelievable. There was only one other possible conclusion to draw, that the Earth was at rest. Physicist Bernard Jaffe. Thus, failure of the Michelson-Morley to observe different speeds of light at different times of the year suggested that the Earth must be at rest. It was therefore the preferred frame for measuring absolute motion in space. Yet we have known since Galileo that the Earth is not the center of the universe. Why should it be at rest in space? Physicist Adolph Baker. The easiest explanation was that the Earth was fixed in the ether and that everything else in the universe moved with respect to the Earth and to the ether. Such an idea was not considered seriously, since it would mean in effect that our Earth occupied the omnipotent position in the universe, with all the other heavenly bodies paying homage by moving around it. Physicist James Coleman. The Michelson-Morley experiment confronted scientists with an embarrassing alternative. On the one hand, they could scrap the ether theory, which had explained so many things about electricity, magnetism, and light, or if they insisted on retaining the ether, they had to abandon the still more venerable Copernican theory that the Earth is in motion. To many physicists, it seemed almost easier to believe that the Earth stood still than that waves, light waves, electromagnetic waves, could exist without a medium to sustain them. It was a serious dilemma and one that split the scientific thought for over a quarter century. Many new hypotheses were advanced and rejected. The experiment was tried again by Morley and many others, with the same conclusion. The apparent velocity of the Earth through the ether was zero. Historian Lincoln Barnett, forward by Albert Einstein. What happened when the experiment was done in 1887? There was never in any orientation at any time of year any shift in the interference pattern. None. No shift, no fringe shift, nothing. What's the implication? Here was an experiment that was done to measure the speed of the Earth's motion through the ether. This was an experiment that was 10 times more sensitive than it needed to be. It could have detected speeds as low as 2 miles a second instead of the known 20 miles per second that the Earth as in its orbital motion around the Sun. It didn't detect it. What's the conclusion from the Michelson-Morley experiment? The implication is that the Earth is not moving. Physicist Richard Wolfson. Michelson and Morley found shifts in the interference fringes, but they were very much smaller than the size of the effect expected from the known orbital motion of the Earth. Physicist John D. Norton. This null result was one of the greatest puzzles of physicists at the end of the 19th century. One possibility was that velocity would be zero and no fringe shift would be expected. But this implies that the Earth is somehow a preferred object. Only with respect to the Earth would the speed of light be c as predicted by Maxwell's equations. This is tantamount to assuming that the Earth is the central body in the universe. Physicist Douglas C. Giancoli. But the die-hard Copernicans of that day were not about to accept the prima facie results of Michelson's experiment. They knew the catastrophic scientific, cultural, and religious implications if it was experimentally shown that the Earth is fixed in space. In a word, the whole world would have been turned upside down, literally and figuratively. Pressured to provide a scientific answer to the world, they searched for a way to make it appear that the first light beam did, indeed, provide 6/6 of the retarded speed required for an Earth moving around the Sun. To do so, they thought up of an ingenious but devious explanation. As noted above, they claimed the Earth's movement around the Sun contracted the metal enclosure in which the first light beam traveled. If the length of the housing is contracted, then the first light beam does not need to travel as far as when the housing is not contracted. This would account for why the speed of the two light beams did not differ much. With this contrived explanation, they proposed to the world that the contraction of Michelson's apparatus was the reason the Earth appeared to be motionless. In effect, if someone said to them, "You claim the Earth is moving, but you admit you cannot detect that movement by any experiment," they would retort, "Well, we can't detect it because every time we try and do so, the length of the experimental apparatus shrinks just enough to conceal the movement, which makes it impossible to measure the Earth's movement." Again, we see that the fallacy of petitio principii is in play. From start to finish, the whole enterprise was ad hoc. Length contraction wasn't even contemplated previously, much less was it as an established fact of science. But in this emergency situation, length contraction was invented on the spot so that the scientific establishment would have at least some hypothetical answer why Michelson's experiment showed that the Earth was motionless. Everyone could breathe a sigh of relief. The irony, as of this date, is that no one has ever detected a length contraction in a moving object. In fact, modern physicists can't even agree on what length contraction is or how it would be manifested. Since they insist that the Earth is moving around the Sun, yet cannot detect it moving, nevertheless, they needed some physical and mathematical way of accounting for it, since there is obviously a difference between motion and non-motion. So length contraction became their convenient scapegoat. This is the essence of the special relativity theory that Einstein invented in 1905. It was invented solely to answer Michelson's experiment, as Einstein himself said. To the question whether or not the motion of the Earth in space can be made perceptible in terrestrial experiments, we have already remarked that all attempts of this nature have led to a negative result. Before the theory of relativity was put forward, it was difficult to become reconciled to this negative result. Albert Einstein. Whereas in 1892 Hendrik Lorentz had hypothesized that the ether of space was what caused the contraction, Einstein decided to dispense with ether and attribute the cause to relative motion. In effect, Lorentz at least proposed a physical cause for his claims of length contraction, but Einstein never explained how relative motion could shrink objects. Hence, during his day, various philosophers accused him of violating the principle of cause and effect. But at this point in time, the 1910s and 1920s, the world was only too happy to accept Einstein's theories and reject anyone who challenged them. After all, Einstein was the Earth mover. He made the Earth move around the Sun, and thus saved mankind from having to admit that popular science had misled the world for the 500 years prior. They do this because they don't want to admit that Einstein invented special relativity for the express purpose of making it appear that the Earth was moving around the Sun. They want to make it appear that Einstein invented special relativity out of pure motives and out of an independent thought process. The truth is far different. Einstein himself admits that the only reason he invented special relativity was due to Michelson's discovery. He writes in 1922, "Soon I came to the conclusion that our idea about the motion of the Earth with respect to the ether is incorrect, if we admit Michelson's null result as fact. This was the first path which led me to the special theory of relativity." That Einstein believes the Earth is moving, but has no proof for it, is noted in his statement, "I have come to believe that the motion of the Earth cannot be detected by any optical experiment, though the Earth is revolving around the Sun." Einstein's admission merely begs the question, if, on a scientific basis, he can't detect the Earth moving, how does he know the Earth is moving? The truth is, he doesn't know. He just assumes it to be so, since that is what he has been taught since childhood. In effect, the transform equation is then invoked to make it appear as if the Earth is moving around the Sun, but in reality, the transform equation is just an equation and it has no ability or authority to determine the issue.
So at this point, hopefully you're thinking to yourself, well, everything we've been taught about the sun, the moon, the stars, and the earth is wrong if what we're hearing is true and what the Bible is saying is true. Before you get too worked up, too bent out of shape, too start fretting too much and worrying too much, what effect is it going to have if everything you've been told about those things is wrong? The sun's still going to come up tomorrow. You're still going to go to work tomorrow, go to school tomorrow, stay home and play tomorrow, whatever you're going to do tomorrow. The rest of the things in life are going to continue as they are. The only difference is what you believe about this book is going to be changed for forever. You're either, after hearing and seeing the things you're hearing in this Bible study, you're going to become more in love with this book and the God of this book than you've ever been. And you're going to be more done with the world and all of its philosophies than you've ever been. Or you're going to have to abandon this book, one or the other. I hope what happens in your life is what happened in my life several years ago when I went down this road myself. And I just decided whatever this book says, that's what I'm going to believe. Lord, show me where I'm going. I personally, at this point, am so glad that I looked into the things that I had. I did it in part because of some of you asking questions about the things we're looking at. But the reality of the matter is this. If you believe this book the way it's written, everything makes a whole lot more sense than the stuff you've been told. So don't panic, but hold on to your seat next week. All right, any questions or comments about anything from tonight? It has to be about something from tonight, though.